Hello, everybody. Welcome to another AutoCrit Live.
Good
Hello,
evening,
everybody.
good
Welcome to
day, good
another
afternoon.
AutoCrit Live. Sorry, go ahead.
Saying good day, good evening, good afternoon. I guess for some people, good night.
Yes, you never really know. And of course, you could be watching this on a replay, so we really never know. We do have people from all over South Carolina, Tennessee, Washington, Wisconsin, Texas, North Dakota, Maryland, Wisconsin, Los Angeles. You know how you know people from Los Angeles because they don't say the state, they just say Los Angeles because, that's a state in of itself. I can say that because I came from Los Angeles, so it's like it's a state of mind all in of itself. Mississippi, Kansas, fantastic. So, I'm here with Gareth, and together we're going to talk about what to do with all the stuff that you maybe made during Nano, or what to do with a draft after you've made it. After the draft, we call it, after your first draft. What do? You brainstormed, you put out your pile of words. A lot of people tend to what they call pants or discovery write that first draft. So you're at the end of it and you reached that end and you're like, now what? So this is the now what after the draft.
Well, I think before you're now what you're kind of woohoo.
Yes,
And
that's
it's
true.
so we had a bit
Let's
of
give
that
ourselves
last
a
week.
pat on the back just to start out with. You finished a draft.
Yeah. So
That's
this
like better than what, 80% of writers? I'm just making up statistics, but I mean, seriously though, there are so many people that will say, "Well, I'm gonna write a book," and then they never even write a first draft. So really give yourself a round of applause just for getting through that. It is a process in of itself.
yes, we're kind of following on from what we did last week because as Daniel mentioned and we all know, NaNoWriMo has just left us for another year,
Yep.
and so many people kind of sitting down during that to knock out a full manuscript and get a book going. So it's that period afterwards we thought we might as well come in after because over the past few weeks, as we've been talking about things like keeping up motivation and keeping yourself going through the actual creation of a draft, part of what we talked about was systematizing things,
Yes.
putting things in an order and making it as easy as possible to actually do. And this is one of the conversations that we tend to have around, well, let's call it AutoCrit towers, or inside the AutoCrit community, is people asking kind of, how do you do it? How do you guys do it? In what order do I do things? And certainly if you're an AutoCrit user, you'll be familiar with this, is looking at the row of tabs and options and going, what way do I do this? And
Right?
we thought, well, ideally, let's do that. So this
Mhm.
month we've broken it down actually into a kind of segmented 3-part series. We're calling it After the Draft. When you finish your draft, what are you gonna do? And literally breaking it down into a step-by-step system. So you follow these in order, sort it all out, and by the time you get to the end, if you haven't lost your mind completely and turned out to actually despise everything that you've written, you come out with something that is, for all intents and purposes, ready to go. You got a perfect
Yep.
manuscript ready to start showing to the world. So we want to make that easy, and talk through some of the concepts and things that you should do to make this into a kind of a system, and why, some of the reasons why things are in that order. And we'll see this unfold over the next few weeks as we finish up the year, because it's December.
Yeah. I know, right?
Who saw that coming?
I know, it's crazy. Now, when it comes to systems, I'm a huge advocate for systems. I often say I prefer systems versus goals because although systems in some ways people are like, but they're just short-term goals. Okay, I gotcha. It gets a little semantic, but when it comes to systems, these are processes that you can put in place, they're habits, and then rather than a goal where it's like, well, until I'm done with the whole thing, I'm kind of a failure, and then you get done with it and you're like, well, now what? It's just a system, and you keep progressing artistically as you do it because you figure out the processes that we're going to talk about. Well, Gareth is going to share his particular take on a good system, and I'm very excited about that. And the nice thing about systems is that, you may find that certain elements of the system work really well for you. You may find you want to adapt it a little bit to your own taste. That's great. The nice thing about it is that we will be giving you the reasons behind it. We won't just be saying, well, this is the way you do it because this is the way you do it. And that's the way to do it. We're going to be giving you our method behind the madness so you can figure out if it works for you or your writing process. So I'm really excited about this because, like I said, I love systems.
Yeah, and in terms of
You want
systemizing,
to go ahead and go
systemizing
ahead.
all of this kind of stuff as well, there are kind of what you may consider elements of sort of free radicals that, you're dealing with something creative, so there'll always be stuff floating around the outside and some more reactionary action that you'll have to take as you're going through the process. But certainly the vast majority of it, I think, falls into a nice structure. And
Mhm.
like Daniel said, yeah, this series, funnily enough, I'm the architect behind it. This is my process. This is the order I put things in that I find works. So we'll be able to give the reasoning behind that. Certainly, you're free to experiment and switch things around wherever you like. But if you're starting out and kind of struggling with editing and getting your things all nipped and tucked and tidied away, this will, I think, be very, very beneficial if you just follow it and stick to it. One thing as well, with that in mind, is that you may not want to come back and constantly watch video of this over and over again if you're following along with the process over the next few weeks. So we'll have a written blog edition of all this as well on the blog for you. So
Nice.
don't be afraid to hop over to autocrit.com /blog, and there'll be written version there that you can hop into anytime you like as well. So all good. Hopefully that's helpful.
That is very helpful. Well, we might as well kind of get started. So we have the first steps of the developmental edit. Um, and when it comes to developmental edit versus line editing, we'll get into that a little bit later. So if you're not sure what the term developmental edit, don't worry. We're going to explain our terms. But the first step that Gareth has is let it rest. Relax.
Yes, let it rest. Let it be. Let it be. The one thing
The
really
famous
to stress before we get into this, and you'll see this is actually in the written versions that we'll release over the next few weeks, reiterated in each of the written versions, because there's a big question that a lot of people ask themselves is, should I do my own editing? Am I? And really, that question or asking yourself that comes from a place of uncertainty is telling yourself, well, I'm not an editor. I'm not an editor by trade or by training or profession. I don't have the know-how to functionally edit something. Now, there is a bit of truth to that. A human editor, people are trained to look at stories, and certainly, even if you have somebody that just understands story structure to a large degree,
Mhm.
can be great extra eyes to see something, because there is the problem of, well, A, you're not particularly trained in editing, and B, you're very close. You're too close to the writing. So some people will say, well, I shouldn't do any editing then. It's not my place. Um, the other side, the counterpoint to that is that yes, it is. It's only beneficial to actually tidy things up as much as possible to the extent of your own understanding and capacity before giving it across to somebody else. It's just taking a shortcut. You do that bit of work yourself, and that means that the next person, your human editor who gets their hands on the book, can actually dig right in and find the bigger things instead of weeding through grammatical errors or parts where you're reading and you go, oh, that's not well worded, and you know
Mhm.
that for a fact. Just fix it yourself.
Mhm.
Or sequences that are just laden with purple prose
Mhm.
all over the place. I think we also have videos and blogs on purple prose. If you're not certain what
We
that is,
do.
just search the channel for the term purple prose. You can learn all about that
It's
and how to
fun.
catch it in your own writing. Um,
Right.
and fix things like that first, so your editor doesn't have to do that. I think it makes sense both time wise. It helps you learn and grow as a writer. There's no better way to do that than to actually challenge yourself in terms of that's not
Mhm.
good enough, and you have to fix it. It helps weed out your own bad habits, and of course, friendlier on your wallet at the end of the day too, because you send it to an editor, you pay so much, they can only fix so much, and then you send it back to them again with revision every time, every round you're paying again and again. So it only makes sense to,
Yep.
to cut that down for yourself. Now, that said,
Yep.
that's kind of justification for really getting into this sequence of events or sequence of tasks, I suppose, is what they really are. Your first task is take a break, which is a great one to begin with. I certainly like this one being the first thing. Let it rest. Um, reason reason for this: a clear mind makes for better decision making. Quite
Mhm.
frankly, I know a lot of us uh, kind of like to think sometimes like I perform best under pressure and all. Really, we don't. You can become too scatterbrained, and especially in the sense of writing. By the time you've gotten to the end of something, which can often feel like a battle. If you're
Mhm.
writing, you're getting 90,000 word story out in order into a manuscript. That's not an easy thing. It can be fraught with all kinds of stressors and self doubts and second guessing and changing things on the fly
Mhm.
and feeling lost at times and all of this. When you get to the end of it, fall into the elation. Like we said earlier, give yourself a pat on the back. Take that manuscript, set it aside, and enjoy yourself for a while. You basically need that
Mhm.
time to switch your mind. If go back to what I said previously, with this kind of perspective of if you didn't want to do the editing yourself in any kind of shape or form, you're thinking, I don't have the mind of an editor. Well, if you're willing to accept that yes you do, or yes you can in some way, you do need a bit of a transition period to switch between the two, especially when you've been so deep in the writer brain for so long. I guess whether it's been 1 month, NaNoWriMo, or whether it's been a series of months or years, if you've really been struggling with this thing, getting it out there, still take a break, let it rest, put it away. Um, Now, I like to just go do things that are entertaining for me, spend some time, just watch movies, play games,
Mhm.
generally mess around, work on other projects, move on to something different and let this thing just sit there for a while. And that's really just the point. Now, that's not to say that you can't think about it. Certainly, if there's a certain story element that as you're sitting around, so let's say you take 2 weeks, you're taking 2 weeks as a break to let this thing rest. And the length of time will vary between people. I certainly recommend a week at least, so a week or two. But you may take a bit longer or less, depending on what works for you. But if something comes to you during that time where you think about an element of that story in the middle of that first week and you know it's a problem and you know it's something you want to fix or something you want to introduce or adjust, write it down. That's not to say
Mhm.
just let it go, because there's nothing more frustrating than having that great idea going, oh, but now it's not the right time to act on it, and then losing it forever because it just, how many times do we do that? You tell yourself, I'll remember it. We never ever do. So don't be afraid. This is not to say don't touch it or don't think about it in any way, shape, or form, but don't sit down and start leafing through it, getting into it, starting to, kick yourself because you saw this one part that uh, is written incorrectly and you only finished it 2 days ago. Don't treat yourself so harshly. So, kind of a combination of putting yourself in the right mind for it and letting your mind clear enough to come back to it correctly. So, that's our first tip. Let it rest, first part of the process. And I'll catch up with comments here because I think Daniel may actually be frozen there, as happy and blissful as he looks. Oh, yep, there he goes. He's disappeared. We'll see if he comes back in a moment to get us to step two. While we're waiting for him to re-emerge, anybody here? Bobby, yes, 100% reward yourself. If you've joined us on live streams before, and also in any of my classes and things like that, you may have heard me rant on about what I call the accomplishment cycle, which is something that kind of extends into every section of life, which is capped off by rewarding yourself. You put effort in, you did something, you planned, you took action, you completed the action, and you solved the problem or accomplished the thing. Now that cycle has to end with a self of reward, a sense of reward. Just you, for lack of a better term, you treat yourself like a little dog and give yourself a wee treat at the end of it, and that reinforces with you that yes, you've done a good thing. So keep that up and reward yourself at the end. But I want to ask anybody who's watching here in the comments, do you let it rest? Anything you've worked on before? And if you do, if that's become part of your strategy, part of your working structure, how long works for you? I know I said maybe about a week, 2 weeks. Does anybody go longer? Have a certain length of time before they like to come back around and look at something? Just pop that into the chat and let me know. It'd be interesting to see what everybody kind of does or works with. Robin, that's 6 weeks essential for me. Yeah, okay, 6 weeks is, yep, that's a good length of time. And in that 6 week period, would you work on something else or just take the time off? Like I said, go do interesting things. Not that writing's not interesting. I don't mean it like that. It's things that are hobbies or whatnot. Bruce, leaving things for months when I get frustrated with deep issues. Yeah, that can be tough. When you just kind of dread dread coming back to it. Laurie, give it a month. Yep, it's a good length of time. Psycha, same, about a month. Mike, 3 weeks. Yep, yep. Longer the work, the longer the rest. Oh, good one.
It's true. Wasn't it it's Stephen King who says he likes to get so engrossed in another work that by the time he comes back to it he can barely recognize it and it feels like it's from another author, right? So it's like
Yeah.
he's an audience member. All right. So, what is next? Let's see. Restrain your inner copy editor is what I have.
Yes. When you're actually beginning here, you'll notice that the title of this first round is First Steps and the Developmental Edit. Now, that's because in the very beginning, when you've written something you've got to draft down, I recommend not actually jumping right into it on the word level when we're talking about line editing or copy editing. Jumping in and picking apart the actual sequence of words that you've written per sentence, per paragraph, per whatever it is avoiding that. To actually begin with, before you start putting all that effort, because that's where the real brain burning stuff starts to happen when you are chopping sentences in half, when you're just not sure if that word is the correct one or whether a synonym carries a different kind of tone or vibe that you're actually going for. Those things that you start to really fight with yourself, um, it's not worth getting into that battle, as far as I'm concerned, if you're ultimately not going to be happy with the story. That just
Right.
feels like wasted effort on my on
It
from my
does.
perspective. So when you're jumping in at this very first point, so the thing is rested, you've gone and taken your mind off it, maybe done what Stephen King does. You know, they're going get so invested in another project that you come back to this one, and all of a sudden it's almost unrecognizable. It's like, okay, I'm reading something for the first time. And when you come back to it, restrain your inner copy editor. You're going to be on this kind of first pass through everything, looking at the story developmentally. Now that means like Daniel said earlier, if you were confused about what a developmental edit means, it means you're considering the bigger picture. We're looking
Mhm.
at the plot itself, the structure of the story, how you've laid it out, the characters, the people within it. None of this really has anything to do with whether you've worded something correctly or
Right.
you've used a metaphor that is just too much of a reach and doesn't really make any sense,
Yep.
and that kind of thing. So restrain your inner copy editor. Um,
Mhm.
Anytime you're reading through at this point, and when I say restrain as well, I mean ruthlessly. Now, it's not to say, again, you can't catch a word here or there as you're reading through, but really try to hold that back, because as you're going through it and you'll see, oh, that's a filler word. I got to get rid of that. Leave it for now. Just leave it.
Yeah.
Don't start getting involved, because what can happen, and that's possibly the next slide. Did you put it on a slide, Daniel, in terms of doing everything in order?
Yes. Do these
Yeah,
things.
important. Do these next things one at a time. And again, this is what makes this a system
Mhm.
or a structure to follow through. You could consider it almost a checklist,
Right.
is focusing on these things one at a time in order. And the reason that I would not recommend is you're doing a looking at it from a developmental perspective and suddenly going, oh, well, it's just a filler word. I can see that's just a filler word. I'll fix that as I go through here. Okay, but what about the next one? And the next
Mhm.
one, and the next
Like
one,
polishing
and
a
the
car,
next one.
right? You just keep finding spots.
It just keeps happening. And
Yeah.
before you know it, the focus that you were
Mm.
putting on these developmental issues starts to get spread too thin. What I
Right.
call squirrel syndrome. I've talked about it before. You just can get bogged down really then in one chapter or one section, and you're going round and round and round in circles, looking at five, six different things at once, and then oh, I'll check it for this now. Oh, I'll check it for this now. No,
Right.
it can really feel like that you get stuck there, and the
Yep.
problem that kind of goes into that, and this is why it's my recommended order of things. Some people I know do like to choose a chapter, and they'll do everything on that chapter. Um,
Mhm.
that's fine. But move on to the next
Yep.
chapter and do that next chapter
I
altogether.
know people like that.
Now, the way I like to do it is going with one focus from the beginning to the end of the manuscript, everything. So I'll focus on one. and that's why I say do this in this order, is focus on one thing. But
Mhm.
it's especially useful to start, if you're starting out and don't really have your own rhythm, your own flow for these things. And then when you get to the end, you start the journey again. So you go back with another focus. Consider what you're looking at. You're almost like a computer, and you're just an AI changing what the
Yep.
focus of the equation is, and go from start to finish, go from start to finish, go from start to finish, go from start to finish from each little thing. Now, the reason I prefer to do that is because when you are focusing on a smaller part and just looking at it from all these different angles at the same time, yep, squirrel syndrome can kick in. You start just going around in circles in this one small section of the book, and it doesn't feel personally or cognitively like you're actually moving forward. That's when the frustration then kicks in, is this damn thing just won't come together. And you start to
Yeah.
lose your mind because it doesn't
I
feel,
think
even though you are making progress, you're fixing little bits, but it doesn't feel like you've got any forward momentum.
yeah, I think too another thing is that when you're so broad, it's like you're not gonna notice the same things. I mean, think of like how they build a car, right? They don't just put the whole thing together and then stress test every part after that, right? They stress test as they go because otherwise, how are you going to know, right? And you don't want your whole structure to come toppling down later because to Garrett's point, well, you might have the most beautifully written chapter, but it's not even in your book anymore. And and you may not identify that weak part. You'll get, because your chapter's so gorgeous in terms of the prose writing, that you won't identify it. You'll give it to an editor, you'll give it to readers, and they'll be like, dude, what about this plot hole? And you're like, oh, whoops.
Yeah, you don't want to get caught there. Sometimes, like, it can happen anyway, despite your best efforts. how many,
Mhm.
how many fully established A-list
Oh, sure.
authors, again, release stories that
Yeah,
still have plot holes. It happens.
yeah,
Happens to the
yeah.
best of us. However, you want to take as much effort as possible to make sure it doesn't. Certainly, human editors and people, beta readers and people you can hand it off to are invaluable for finding that kind of stuff. But funnily enough, that's kind of where we're starting here as well. If we move on to our next thing. So, this said, important, do these next things one at a time in order. And I recommend from start to finish, then just switch to the next. I just consider them targets. This is what I'm targeting this time around for the whole book. And then switch and move back to the beginning for the next thing. And this is focus on plot as we're starting. So, like I said, take your attention away from the
Focus.
copy. Tell the copy editor to shut up. It's not their time. They're not allowed in the room right
Seriously.
now, and
Ugh.
we're going to focus on the plot. Um,
Yeah.
as you see Daniel saying there, a beat sheet can really help because at this point, focusing on the overall plot, you're looking at the structure of it. So, I would
Mhm.
recommend reading through the story as you have laid it out and actually map out separately on a sheet of paper. You can do this as bullet points if you wanted to. Bullet list is actually quite easy to follow, or you could do it on a spreadsheet. Whatever you like to do digitally. But map that out separately. How the story actually progresses from beginning to end. You don't
Right.
need to dig into all of the intricate details of what happens in every scene. Otherwise, you're basically just condensing the book down and rewriting it all out again. But simply do it as bullet points. Like, this is what
Mhm.
happens in the first scene. This
Right,
is what happens in the next scene. This is what
right.
happens after that. So, what's your opening? What's your setup?
Mhm.
Who's the main character and how are they introduced?
Right.
Of course, of paramount importance, what's the story's inciting incident? And
Mhm.
these kind of things as well is, as you're doing this, mark out which chapter it occurs in. So where do I have it? These, especially the big bullet points. You have your introduction of the villain. Um, what is the villain doing to apply pressure to the main characters? Where are the big clashes? What kind of events are we seeing there? Where do they appear in terms of chapter number? So you can have a separate little column
Yeah.
attached to each of your lines, each of your bullet points that has the chapter marked. So you got an idea of distance in between each of them.
Or if you're a crazy statistician type like me, you'll actually put the percentage in your book.
Yeah, you can start doing percentages if you want to get weird.
Thanks, Gareth. I appreciate that. Just pedantic, okay?
So there's a place for pedantry.
There is, and it's my house.
What you're essentially doing here, which in this quick bullet point list, is I want to be able to see in that quick bullet point from beginning to end how the story actually evolves as it's
Mhm.
progressing? Is it a bona fide story? Is there ups and
Mhm.
downs? Is there twists and turns? Are things
Right.
changing? You don't want the plot to feel too flat. And one of the things that you'll also be looking for is somewhere around the midpoint. Daniel's 50%, probably perfect, would be the that kind of midpoint beat, where you'll often see kind of
Yeah.
twist applied to the
Right.
story. Something new comes up that
Yep.
makes the main characters have to change course. It's like, oh, the story's no longer
Right.
what we kind of started with or thought it was. Now we have to go in a little different direction because things are different. So you can see all that
Exactly.
coming and unfolding just in a bullet list. And of course, how does it end? And does the ending make sense? Is what you want to look
Right.
at too. If you quickly read down that list, can you chain all these events together so that what happens in the end actually feels like it makes sense, like it's connected to
Mm.
what came before? Because you don't want an
Right.
ending that just comes out of left field and again makes no sense. And it's quite easy at this really high sort of plot overview level to see whether you've left any threads hanging. Because earlier on, as you're writing out this bullet list, you're going to be pointing out major events. And we all know that most of those are being established earlier in the book. Then, when you
Mhm.
get towards the second half of that bullet list, you'll be able to see points where those things that were raised that as you were starting to write that list and you were all excited about listing out your plot and the things that are happening, oh wait, one or two things that were in that early excitement aren't present in the second half.
Mhm.
They've just disappeared. A real easy way to find those threads of things that you thought you introduced because they were so felt so major and you lost track of them. It
Yep.
happens. Really easy. And for help with this, definitely you can check out our AutoCrit story beat sheet that we have.
Yes.
I'll see after this as well if we can put the link, but it is on the blog. We've got a blog article that actually breaks down the sheet and all of the beats and everything that you
Yep.
can check. So autocrit.com/blog.
Yep.
Pop over there
And
and you can
and
get a
on
beat sheet.
this channel, you can go back to our Drop the Beat challenge where Gareth and I went through all that beat sheet too and went into more detail about it.
That's right. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think we'll put that as a related video or whatever way we can do that as well.
Mhm.
So check it all out. Get used to a beat sheet because they can be real handy, even if you don't use them for planning. I think they are really handy for after the fact things like
Mhm.
this, where you're just making sure that the structure actually makes sense. And yeah, when you've got your bullet list, we're really trying to keep an eye on that chain of sort of cause and effect that runs through it from beginning to end. So everything seems to link its way to an earned finale. Like it's something that
Yep.
actually makes sense. And it's kind of ensuring too. It's not to say that your story can't be unpredictable. Of course, it can. But even unpredictable twists and turns and everything should still resolve smoothly. Everything actually
Mhm.
gels together. So this is
Right.
pretty much the first thing that you will do is just read through it all and map it out after the fact. Make sure that it's not a mess, quite just a plot mess,
Mhm.
basically. Because, like I said earlier, you're not going to want to spend hour after hour after hour line editing to get all the writing as perfect as you like it, only to find that your plot is a mess because things are then going to have to move. They're going to have to be blended into one another. Things are going to move into different scenes, and then you got to fix all that writing again.
Yep.
No, no, thank you. So let's
Yeah.
make the system as efficient as possible.
Yep. You'll be polishing a car and it turns out it's actually a submarine. That's how it is.
And you've used the wrong kind of polish.
All right, so next we do another hyper focus. I'm gonna get my focus on characters and arcs,
Indeed.
like like big
And
boats, lots of animals. Is that what you mean? I don't think
this
so.
one, using a beat sheet can help with this too. Now, animals can be characters. How are they being presented? Yes, I'm not going to discount that. What if you've written The Lion King and all your characters are animals? Huh? What about that? So the beat sheet really helps here too, tracking character arcs. So where previously you were looking at the actual plot, not so considered about what the characters are, um, kind of the intricacies of them and what they're learning and doing. You're looking at the events that are happening within the plot and whether they seem to make sense. So that's your
Mhm.
plot overview. Now, with that done and everything, yep, that fits. You're looking at characters because they're going to have to track along with that plot. Much in the same way that a plot arc happens, character arcs are going along. There too. They've got the same kind of beats. The beats are intrinsically connected in many ways. You've got twists, revelations, people developing and growing and showing different sides of themselves and things that they've learned. So I do recommend as well taking a beat sheet and using that to map character journey too. The same beats,
Mhm.
and you're going to hold that side by side. We've talked about this previously. Is filling out the beat sheet once for your plot in terms of the plot beats, and filling out another the exact same beat sheet again for your main character, and you're marrying what the character is going through with that plot beat. So you can actually see if they make sense tied together. So does the event that happens in this at this plot beat, does it make sense that it has this effect on the character in terms of what it makes, how it changes them, how it makes them react, the things that they do they make sense for that character? And with that sheet completed as well, when you have them both side by side and you look at it, what you should be able to see is a clear trajectory, the character journey. They're going from this position to this position, from A to B, beginning of the story and end of the story. And it makes sense that the events that have taken place in the plot of the story have caused that, or have fed into that in a way. It doesn't necessarily have to be
Mhm.
direct cause, but you know what I mean.
Right.
That they are
Mhm.
intrinsically tied, and that goes into the chain of cause and effect as well. When you've got your bullet list, changes in your character, they should be prompted or manifested by the events of the story. They don't just change their mind for no reason, become a
Right.
completely different person, unless that's
Right.
part of the plot. As I
Right.
say, characters don't do that. Well, sometimes they do, but again, that's if that's the plot, then it's intrinsically tied to the events. You
Right.
don't get away with it that easy.
And it's acknowledged to the audience, right? It's like, "Oh, that
Correct.
person never behaved that way," you know? Yeah. They don't just all of a sudden behave a way you've never seen before, and it's like, you're not you're supposed to go with it, right? Is that
Yeah.
that feels like they're not an identifiable person at that point.
Yes, 100%. So that kind of thing is like the plot of the story ends up being about this person isn't acting like themselves. Why is
Right.
that? And then
Yeah.
deeper things contained within that. So focus on character. Second of all, you're
Yeah.
looking at whether your characters are mapping correctly into the plot structure. Now, each of these things as well, I would say, as you're mapping them and coming back, fix them. At the same time, you're going through and you're looking at that plot structure. If the plot doesn't make sense, fix that, then move on to the characters. Check that they map correctly on. If they don't anymore, fix that. So you're fixing these layers as you go.
Mm. Now, what would you say this is something where basically you have to do it for, like, each character, right? But, like, obviously, there's a point in where you maybe don't need to worry about it as much, right? Because not every character you have to necessarily go on that detail. Is it possible you can end up with a little bit of paralysis, getting a little bit
Oh
too
yeah,
worried
for
about every
sure.
little, the grocery store clerk that's in, like, a seed, like, you
Yes.
take this a little bit too far.
When we're talking about this one, this is main characters.
Yeah.
You're probably uh, definitely main focus on this, doing it the whole hog, putting the full effort in is your main character.
Mhm,
And if you have a little ensemble, your main characters in that case, if you have a little group
mhm.
at the beginning of it, you may want to do it for secondary characters to be sure. Tertiary and below, I wouldn't bother. You can catch
Right,
things about them as you read through. That's
yeah,
final checks, final tucks.
yeah. Well, a lot of characters, you only need to know the motivation just for the scene they're in because that's all their purpose is in the story. Their lifelong ambition is not really
Yeah,
relevant,
we
so
we
it's
don't
really
need that. And they're not gonna grow and evolve and have to convince us that that was necessary if they're a store
important.
clerk.
Yeah,
That's not the thing.
exactly. Yeah, perfect. All right, so focus on conflict. All right, and this is a different move. So, what do you mean specifically about conflict, and how do you distinguish conflict from plot?
Conflict. Now, this is the thing. One of the pretty much core facets of enthralling drama, of proper drama, is
Right.
conflict. And conflict doesn't need to be punching people in faces. Is not necessarily. It can be, and that is
I think we're
conflict.
having conflict about that, Gareth. No,
But
I'm just
yeah, it doesn't need to be. It's like, how can I punch someone across the internet? Let's do it.
kidding.
But basic conflict, it just comes down to problems.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
dramatic conflict is problems and problem
right.
solving. We want to see characters when we come into a story at any point in a story. We want to see people that have problems. That's drama. That's involving.
Mhm.
We don't want to see characters
Right.
for whose life is just a breeze and everything goes right from beginning to end and it's all great and there's really nothing much going on except you know looking at I don't even know if there's any kind of entertainment that even fits that. Even when you're watching something that's like the uh like
That's like
MTV
wallpaper, that's
Cribs.
like a screensaver, that's like what you put on it's like, the Yule log or something, right? I
Yeah,
mean, you don't
I
really
mean,
call that entertainment, that's like ambiance, you know?
look at things like reality TV stuff with the lives of the rich and famous. These people that from normal kind of person perspectives have everything. And what do the shows, what are they all about? That person's problems, the drama
Mhm.
in their lives,
Yep.
even though they're
Yep.
loaded and have a 25 car garage and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
We want to see people with problems, and we want to see them face obstacles. And really, in any enthralling story from the beginning, the path ahead is always just fraught with struggles. And these struggles are minor and major. It's not that every single thing they do in life is soul crushingly terrible. It can be something really, really small. It's a, it's an off kilter conversation. There's no coffee in the cupboard. Just very, very simple things count as conflict. And it really is the case that a lot of,
Yep.
a scene that contains no sort of conflict whatsoever is a scene that lacks purpose. It's really not there. That's not to say
Right.
that this is a hard and fast rule, 100%, that no scene ever should ever exist if it doesn't have any conflict in it. That's not entirely true. You will have some that are simply there to
Right.
reinforce a point or to show the aftermath of something. So that's fine. But it does become true enough for when you're checking through the story for conflict that it's worthy as a sense as a topic of focus for one pass at least. That's why I would put it here and recommend. So you're going to go through here, and this gets a little more in depth than your bullet list. You're actually going to break down the manuscript scene by scene. A spreadsheet is probably the easiest thing here, and we also have a story structure sheet to give an overview of that. I'll make sure that the story structure sheet download link goes in the description below this video when the recording is live. And you're going through each scene and noting the core conflict that's actually present within each of those scenes. Um, for example, is it an action scene? The core conflict is there's a shootout or there's a car chase. X is chasing Y, for example. Or again, is it something more subtle? Is it a disagreement in a conversation? Is it that they go to the cupboard and there's no coffee and they're desperate for coffee? That kind of thing. I saw Ken's comment. Yeah, even comedy series on TV have constant conflict. Comedy is often born out of conflict most of the time. Um, and yeah, Escray bickering is a good light way to learn about the characters. It is indeed. A lot of the things that are said back and forth between them really helps you to, putting people at loggerheads is a good way to reveal what they're all about. That's why drama works. Because there's always something going on. It doesn't have to be overt. A lot of really great drama is revealing these things and putting people against each other in a subtle way. It's what's not said between them that really is the core of what they're thinking and the threat that's involved there between them. But you're in this case going through, marking out each of your scenes and noting what the conflict actually is. And this, to me, is a really great method for finding those scenes that are just dead weight. You're really only using it to deliver a character arc, or a beat. Um, because it's customary. You're like, okay, at this point in the story, I need this beat. So I'm just going to drop that information in so that the audience understands that this is what's happening. But you haven't actually wrapped that up in effective dramatization. And again, effective dramatization often lies within conflict. And you can make a scene like that. You can make a plot beat or a plot point like that feel a lot more impactful or weighty or visceral by the introduction of an actual little piece of conflict or an obstacle, something that they have to overcome. Um, if that's not happening in that scene, well, then you got to find out a way to fix it. And often that scene might just disappear. You just remove that scene because it's not really working, and slide everything together with that scene missing. If you consider I think it's the structure of your story is every scene like a little domino. So you take one out and just shift the rest closer together, so it's all linked together again. And you can find somewhere very close to where you originally had that scene to massage this beat, this bit of information into that already existing scene. If it's already filled with conflict, you can easily get these kind of things in there with a bit of additional dialogue, one extra little event that happens in the middle of it that reveals this beat. So you don't have that happening just floating around in a dead scene of its own, which is really, really just not great. It just feels shoehorned in half the time, when you catch that kind of thing. So yeah, to help with tracking the conflict throughout all the story. Grab a copy of our structure sheet. I'll make sure the link gets posted in here. It'll also be on the blog where we have the written version of this kind of series or system. There'll be a structure worksheet there for you to grab. Alternatively, you can just do it on an Excel spreadsheet, something like that, just chapter number, event. The way I like to do it is chapter number, event. So I've got chapter number. The event is just like a 1 or 2 line description of what's happening in that chapter, and then conflict. What's the actual conflict? So what are they dealing with? And again, just remember that doesn't have to be major. It doesn't mean that because you find something that doesn't have any conflict that you got to add a car chase or it's got to be bombastic. Not at all. It'd be something very simple, something very small. They stub their toe and I can't,
Yep.
that's annoying. Just something simple, just to keep it interesting.
Yep. Although random car chases can be fun. I'm just saying.
Well, you could add a random car chase. Yeah, I mean that would keep things energized. And what's next in the list?
Track important reveals, foreshadowing, and plot relevant items.
Yes. Now this is the pass after that. So far, we are happy that our story, our plot, is in a correct order. Makes
Right.
sense. Structurally is good.
Characters.
Comes to a
Character.
nice ending. Everything ties together. It's a cool plot, and I'm happy with it. Then I've done my character pass. Everything that happens in the plot, my characters are evolving. They're learning. They're growing. They're changing. It's surprising. I'm happy with that. I've got a good plot, and I've got characters that fit within it and have their own kind of arcs and things that they're learning. Excellent. I've also made sure that it's packed with conflict, that at every point that as much or insofar as possible as I can without overblowing it, that it's involving, it's constantly dramatic, that there's always something happening, that people are dealing with problems and overcoming things uh, most of the time throughout.
Mhm.
So great. I actually have a pretty good story on the way here.
Yeah.
And finally, well, it's not entirely finally, but for this developmental run, the next thing is tracking important items and things that you can see here on the screen there. And for this one, I think having a notepad, or if you like to print your manuscripts, having a series of like a little pad of sticky notes would
Hmm.
really come in handy for this one because you're going to actually read through the story once more. You're going to read it over and over again until you're sick of it, from beginning to end again, looking for where you have actually drawn attention to a specific item or a specific detail, whether
Hmm.
that's intentional or unintentional. And
Right.
this is part of why you're coming back with fresh eyes too after giving it a rest in the beginning, because you can start to see with fresher eyes, oh, I drew a lot of attention to that vase, and it's not relevant to anything. Um, People are going to start to think that I'm doing something with this when I'm not really.
Right.
And having your little sticky notes is a good way to track that.
Yeah.
Rather than full sticky notes, I tend to use little colored sticky tabs that just
Hmm.
stick out from the side of books. And a lot of people in our community will know I do that just when I'm reading for fun as well. If I'm keeping an eye out, I like to use one to mark where I think something is being foreshadowed. And then I'll see if it pays off later on in the book for me. See if I guessed. I try to guess how it's going to pay off, what it's being used for, and just give myself a little pat in the back if I catch it. Um, and this is really because drawing attention to things, it does anchor them in the mind of the reader, and they'll begin to assume, much like I will as I'm sitting there with my little sticky tabs, that those details are going to be relevant to something that's going to happen later on. People
Yeah.
like me take a bit of pride in that. I like to do it as a bit of a game. It's an extra layer of enjoyment I get from books, looking out for these things and gamifying itself,
Yep.
gamifying it for myself. And if none of that pays off, if it's all just drawn in for no reason whatsoever, if too many details like that are bestowed an importance that doesn't need to be there, people are going to get annoyed.
Yep.
It just seems like you're not really focusing on what you need to.
Now we did have
Now,
a comment, "Isn't that a red herring?" Yes, you can do this intentionally, but to Garrett's
yes,
point, you can't do this to everything intentionally. That's not good writing. But yes, occasionally drawing attention in the wrong spot is just misdirection. It's like a magician who's trying to pull off a trick. Often you'll notice when people want to draw, and this is something you'll notice now, and so people won't be able to pull this trick off on you. But a lot of times, if authors are trying to get exposition out of the way that's going to be rather revealing, but yet they don't want you to know, but yet they want you to know, they'll make it a joke. It works really well because you tend to absorb it as humor and you kind of forget the meaning of what was said. And so later on, when it comes back, it's like, oh, it's very clever.
I like that. That's it's a pretty good segue as well, though on topic here because, yeah, I was going to say a certain item or something in your story may actually just be a plain MacGuffin.
Yeah.
The term for MacGuffin is something that motivates the characters either initially or throughout the story, but ultimately doesn't actually serve an important role in resolving everything.
Right.
It's not the key to everything else. That's absolutely fine.
Mhm,
MacGuffins are a great thing to use. I love MacGuffin stories,
mhm.
especially in horror. I love horror MacGuffins that lead people down these paths that open up.
Right.
You just want to make sure that things like MacGuffins and certainly red herrings too. With red herrings, you just don't want to overdo it.
Mhm.
A couple of red herrings are fine, but
Right.
the same thing along the lines of a MacGuffin, you don't want it just dropping out of the story entirely with no explanation and no reason and never to be mentioned again. You got to
Yeah.
tie it up, and that's where I as I said, little different colored sticky tabs I use is this is where what I assume to be a foreshadow element arrived, and then I'll mark later on with the same color. This is where it was resolved or wrapped up, and that resolving or wrapping up doesn't mean that it paid off. It means I understand why it's not important, and that's kind of called it. Is that it justifies the original attention being drawn to it. So either way, you can tell me that it was unimportant. Just make that surprising for me, and make me
Yep.
understand, so it doesn't feel like it disappeared. So an
Right.
example of that kind too could be objects or items, like a photograph.
Mhm,
You could have photographs, mysterious, letters, a sealed letter, even characters that show up that you present or you put so much focus on when they appear that they're going to be a source of intrigue. I look at
mhm.
it and go, "Oh, there's something more to this," because we kind of automatically assume that they're going to be important. There's going to be a reveal later on, and if it just disappears, then I'm like, well, what happened to that thing that was supposed to be important here? It hasn't come around for me at all, and that lots of people would end up saying that that's a plot hole. It's not necessarily, but that's how most people would refer to it. As you start getting reviews, people will say, "Oh, it's plot holes abound," and what they really mean is that there were things that seemed important that disappeared. Half the time when people are saying plot holes, that's actually what they mean. So it is to that point as well. Just to reiterate, there could be objects, people, or details that you give an air of importance to. They don't actually have to be central to the plot's resolution. They can be a red herring. They can be a MacGuffin, but you do need to show me where they went or why they're not actually important. Just don't leave loose
Yeah.
threads, loose ends hanging around
So
all over the shop. So that's your next.
actually, we had an interesting comment because Ken said what makes Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds unique is there's no MacGuffin. I actually don't agree with you. I would say the lovebirds are the MacGuffin in that, and I will say, just like Garrett's point, it comes around full circle, and at the end of the movie, they have to go and get the lovebirds. Even though all the other birds have gone crazy because somehow they have it. And the movie never explains why the lovebirds are different than all other birds because they don't react the same way that the other birds are. So I actually think that's a good example of a MacGuffin and tracking it throughout. So, anywho,
I never
check.
thought of that.
Oh, well, I get kept around here for something, right?
It's been a long time. I'm gonna have to watch the birds again now that you said that. You've intrigued me on that one.
Yeah, well, it's one of those weird questions, like, because actually I watched that because it's a strange piece in general, right? Because it doesn't really have resolution either. It's an interesting piece, the birds, because ultimately it just kind of ends, right? It doesn't really. Apparently, there was supposed to be a final shot that I think would have been a better closing image than what the movie necessarily lands you on, but anyway, I digress. We're not deconstructing the birds. Although, if you'd like us to see it, maybe Gareth and I could do that. We could do a watch. So comment below if you want to see that, and we'll do a watch reaction of the birds. That could be
We'd
fun.
do a fan commentary that everybody can download and watch the birds along
Right,
with us.
exactly. I remember though when I was dating my wife, there was one time where she called me up and she's like, "Remind me never to watch the birds by myself ever again," because she had watched it alone and she was terrified about going to sleep. So cute. All right, so check order and structure. What are we talking about here, Gareth? What kind of order? What kind of structure?
Right. Well, you'll be happy to know that at this point, because I don't want to put kind of uh, I guess, belittle the amount of work that this is because it's a lot of work. As much as we break it down here through those previous kind of 6 steps of things you're doing, it's work, especially in you're talking a full length manuscript here. Easier when it's a short story, and they operate under kind of different rules. So this really comes more it fits more closely to a full manuscript, a novel length piece of work. So you've done a lot. You really have done a lot moving through this, which is your plot structure, your characters. Think of the order: plot, characters. We have tracking conflict, tracking those items to make sure things aren't just dropping off, and you're foreshadowing correctly and making use of that your MacGuffin actually works. Things like that. So you're really really happy with the plot. Final checks, really, order and structure. And this is swinging once more back to the beginning to look through and check that structure. So does the new order make sense? This is final checks to make sure that the changes you have made, because you will be making changes as you go through and discovering that there's no conflict here and you have to take that scene out or switch it up and put that beat somewhere else, where it is exciting, that the character did something here that wasn't earned. So either you had to change that in terms of their reaction, or you had to make the previous thing that happened more convincing that their reaction would be such. So there's lots of fixing that you've done here as well. This isn't all just sitting around thinking and going, it's actually doing a lot of editing, a lot of developmental editing, which changes up the story. So this final check: can you once more follow the plot as it now unfolds based on your changes in a simple manner? And does it line up nicely? Does it line up the way you had hoped it would, that when you did that first plot check? If it does, you're good to go. Same thing for character beats. So you're going to be looking through the parts of the story where we learn something important about their personality as they're changing. Are they now believable and organic and contextually relevant, and everything making sense now? Excellent. And this is your last check, basically making sure that in that order that everything is unfolding now, that it all links together, that it all makes sense. And if not, then you might need to do a little more reshuffling. But hopefully, once you get to this point, you're in a really good position. That's your developmental edit, more or less finished, until it gets to the human editor, who may have other ideas about different scenes and things that you should keep or things that you should change. You may get editorial feedback from an editor who says, "Oh, I'm not quite convinced about this part of the character," and that's one of the things that, as you did your own developmental edit, you really put effort into, and you thought it was perfect. It's going to happen at some point,
Mhm.
and somebody at the other end will turn around and go, "Ah, I didn't really get that," even though you thought you'd done it to perfection. That's why none of this is 100% perfect, but for this first developmental run, this is the order that I would recommend doing these things in. And again, just stick to it, start to finish. And your final checks here are literally final checks. It's just scooping right back to the first one and doing a quick overview once more to make sure that your new version isn't worse, that you haven't left points of, you took a couple of scenes out and now there's a void that makes no sense. Linking the scenes that pre-existed together on the other side, on each side of that void. You need to fill that gap, or at least
Yep.
massage it so that things link once more. I'm always talking about that sort of causal link of causal chain of cause and effect from the beginning of a story through to the end. You want to make sure that the chain hasn't broken by the changes that you've made. So you're still doing a final check to make sure that it comes together, and it comes together better. And that's when you're happy. So if you are happy with it at this point, well, we'll talk about that next week, because then it's time to get the line editing hat out.
Dun dun dun. Well, that's really a very clear system of developmental editing, which I think is really helpful. It's helpful because, to your point, it's like people get in there and they get kind of in the weeds, and then it's like this never-ending analysis paralysis that's hard to get out of. But when you have a system in place, just having the system means it's like, okay, you can check this off. I've done that. I've done that, and I've done that, and then you get to the end of it, and you can be like, well, no matter what shape it's in, at least I've done all the steps, right? And so you can feel like
Yeah,
you have that accomplishment. And and I do actually have faith in the system that, yeah, you'll be quite improved from where you started. So yeah, that's awesome.
indeed. And yeah, then at that point, that's the time to start digging into the way you've communicated what's going on in this, and that's copy editing, line editing, getting into the nuts and bolts of the words that you're using, and making sure that you're happier with the words.
All right. So I just want to do a shout out for what we have here at AutoCrit in terms of a personal touch. So, this can be helpful even if you're at this developmental editing stage, because we have um, author services, we have story doctor clinics that would be with me, or we have chapter reads or things like that. But the story doctor clinic or the story coach sessions would be very helpful at this level, right? Because maybe you can tell you're doing one of these checklists and you can tell, oh, I'm doing this character arc and it just isn't working and I just can't figure out, and you just need another opinion. That could be helpful. Or you're going through your beat sheet and maybe isn't landing, or you're just not sure if it's landing. It can be very helpful to get a second opinion at that point, because think about all to Garrett's point, all the extra steps you're going to do next, right? The next stage, the line editing stage, is where you get into that nitty gritty, and the last thing you want to do is, to my point, polish a car and end up with a submarine, because you'll be feeling like, what was I doing that time? It's like months down the drain. Not that I think any of this is ever unhelpful. I feel like everything is practice, everything is helpful. So don't beat yourself up when you do have to cut out chapters, rewrite story arcs, or anything like that.
Yeah,
But
like
it can be
people
helpful,
like to
like I
say,
said, to have a second opinion. Go ahead.
writing is rewriting.
It
I
is.
can see Elaine mentioning there, sounds like more work than writing it in the first place. In many ways, it is.
It is.
This is
It
where it
is.
actually all comes together, and
It is.
you do the real work of turning it into a great story. Comes
It
afterwards.
is.
But that's not to say, just like Daniel was saying there, I think the perfect time to really sit down and talk to someone about it, in the sense of like with one of our coaches or dropping into a story doctor clinic session and things like that, is when you're dealing developmentally, because that's the point. It can save you a lot of pain when you're talking about, okay, this is the story and this is the character, and then right
Mm.
away that other person can go, well, why does it matter to that character? And
Right.
reveal things that you haven't figured out and you really ought to figure
Mhm.
out before you start writing 95,000 words of a story that doesn't
Yeah.
mean anything.
Right.
So that's a great time to do
Yeah.
it.
It's one of those things. When I get into a clinic session, I don't wanna be rude about it, but often it's, why do I care? Essentially, because, that's the main issue. Or why does the main character care? What just very sometimes just the very basic things can get lost because 'cause you're just so close to it that you forget. It's like, yeah, there really isn't any motivating reason for them to behave that way, and that really just seems arbitrary. I just did it for the sake of doing it. But it can be fixed, right? But you want to fix those things or adjust what it is they're going to have to do or something before you get to the nitty gritty level, because that just gets more painful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that being said, that was a great tease for next week. So next week at 1 o'clock, we'll be getting in deeper in the after the draft and what happens after that developmental edit. And I'm very excited to hear what Gareth has to say, because I already have some ideas on system approaches I might do next time a little bit differently. So this was really
Yeah,
helpful. Thank
we'll
you,
see.
Gareth.
We'll see. It'll be in order. So this is next week will be the not the full final answer, because we do have a third session as well as we get into deeper things. But as we enter next week is the more simple line edits. So we call it the simple line edit. That's how I like to think of it before I move into deeper areas. But yeah, this will be the final reveal of my order of operation, how I actually do it, and an order that works for me. So
Sounds great. So yeah, so everybody please join us. And if you're an AutoCrit member, we do have a special event in the community, don't we, Gareth, coming up?
we do, and that'll be this Thursday. I think we've mentioned it before, but I like to keep reiterating it because we have the amazing Ramsey Campbell joining us live on Thursday for members only. So keep an eye in the AutoCrit community on Mighty Networks. Check the calendar there, and you can RSVP. There's a Zoom link. It'll be a live hour-long Zoom session. Please do come along. Ask Ramsey any questions you like. He'll be there to answer them live. That's what it's all about. Just come and hang out with an amazing, legendary author for an hour on Thursday afternoon. Um, Ramsey is, I believe, acknowledged to be one of the most awarded living genre authors in the world, of
Yeah,
supernatural fiction,
it's
Lovecraftian
really
horror,
exciting.
just wealth and wealth of experience. The amount of time that Ramsey has been with us and sort of producing really great books and stories has seen the publishing world evolve in so many ways. And I think it's going to be a really, really great, interesting session. So we will hopefully see you there on Thursday. Again, if you're not an AutoCrit member, you can sign up right away, autocrit.com. if you're not a AutoCrit member, you get access to our private community there, and that's where the session will be held. So it won't be public here on YouTube, sadly. It is a member benefit, but it should be a great one. I'll be there, and we'll hopefully see you as well. And I think Daniel has frozen again, so I will bid everybody adieu to sign us off. Thanks for coming. If we don't see you on Thursday, hopefully see you next Tuesday, where we'll pick up this series. And in a few minutes, when YouTube has processed the recording of this, we'll pop links to the blog and to the various downloads and things into the description, so you can grab those sheets if you'd like to use those. So thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.